Hello, my name is Brendan Allison from the UCSD Cognitive Science Department. And since my talk today concerns brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs, I'd like to devote a couple slides to reviewing what BCIs are and what they do. A BCI contains four components. First, you need to record information directly from the patient's brain or the user's brain. Second, you need a signal processing tool to figure out what all those squiggly lines mean. Third, you need some kind of output device by which the user can convey desired messages or commands to the outside world. And fourth, as indicated by the arrows, you need some kind of operating system that governs how these different components interact with each other and interact with the user. About 10 years after the initial publication, Drs. Walpaugh presented a somewhat revised approach where they're not changing the components of a BCI, but they're looking at it from the perspective of 5 different applications for which a BCI may be employed. During this talk, I'll be focusing primarily on 2 applications. First, replacing a lost function, and second, restoring a function so that the person is healthier or ultimately completely healthy. There are 4 different ways that BCIs and BCI-like systems, that is, systems that don't strictly meet the definition of a BCI but act like them, have been used for a disorder of consciousness. First, to assess the patient's remaining cognitive function. Second, to provide communication. Third is outcome prediction, that is trying to help doctors, friends, family, and the patient understand and anticipate where the patient might be clinically in 6 months or later. And fourth is rehabilitation. And during my talk today, I'll be focusing primarily on the latter 2 goals, mainly rehabilitation. I've reviewed assessment and communication in other talks and papers. I should also point out that, as you've surely noticed, I'm including many pictures in this talk. These are pictures of various people who have contributed to the work shown here. Some of the work shown here is from my group, and some is from other groups. And these people are also in many of the publications here in the author lists. So when I say rehab, how, and what do I mean by rehab? There are a lot of different ways that you can address this. One is emergence, that is, are you trying to help the person emerge into consciousness? Another type of rehabilitation could be reduced pain or reduced spasticity. You might also be trying to improve memory or attention, and there are other options. So throughout this talk, it's important to note that there are different ways that the word rehab can be employed in this context. In 2005, this very helpful paper helped to present and understand what DOC, or disorder of consciousness, is and what states it includes. You can see that the x-axis reflects the level of consciousness in terms of wakefulness, and the y-axis reflects the content of consciousness in terms of awareness. Now, the term disorder of consciousness includes 3 different states that are shown here. On the far bottom left, you see coma, in which the patient has little to no wakefulness or awareness. If you move further to the right, you see that there is the vegetative state, in which patients may have wakefulness but not awareness. And the third type of DOC shown here is the minimally conscious state, in which patients do have wakefulness, at least intermittently, and exhibit some awareness, at least intermittently. This is an important point that I'll get to later, the intermittent nature of interactions with persons who have disorder of consciousness. We published this paper recently in Frontiers for Young Minds, and even though I understand that most people listening in the audience are older-minded persons, I still wanted to include it because it shows a nice picture depicting how the system operates. So how the system that I'm going to show here, the Mind Beagle system from our work, operates is as follows. You place an electrode cap on the patient's head, and you also place a vibrating tactor on the wrist. So this is a device that vibrates and that the patient can feel. And of course, this is important because these patients typically do not have reliable visual function. And although not clearly shown in this picture, patients will also have earbuds or headphones so that they can hear instructions provided by the clinician and through the system. This is a picture of the system shown here, the MindBeagle system. And you note that it includes an electrode cap, an amplifier. You see a couple of earbuds and one example of a vibrating tactor. There are different ways to approach it. And the display that is shown to the system operator. And you may note that the display includes some buttons where you can launch different types of paradigms, such as auditory or vibrotactile. It shows a real-time display of the electrode quality, so green indicates that you're getting good signal quality, and the recorded EEG in real time. And on the bottom, you see the ERPs, the event-related potentials for target flashes in green, or sorry, target events in green, and non-target events in blue. So in this example, over electrode site CZ, you notice something that looks a lot like a P300 and other components of the P300 complex, in which the large green shaded area shows a large difference between the green line and the blue line. And this indicates that target events are producing a robust P300 in this example, whereas non-target events are not. Well, why does this matter? How the system works is that in a vibrotactile example, the patient is asked to pay attention to vibrations on one wrist while ignoring other vibrations. So, for example, the system might prompt the user to silently count each time the left wrist vibrates while ignoring any vibrations on the right wrist. If the patient performs this task, the target events, that is, the left wrist vibrations, should produce a robust P300 because the user chose to pay attention to them, whereas the non-target events, which are the vibrations to the right wrist, should produce a much less robust P300 and other components of that complex. And so by using this approach, the system can determine which wrist contained the target events. Was the patient paying attention to the left wrist or the right wrist? Well, if the patient can perform a selective attention task like this, that already provides you substantial information about the remaining cognitive abilities and could provide the basis for communication. So you can use this system for yes-no communication as described, where instead of instructing the patient to pay attention to the left wrist or the right wrist, you can instead ask the patient to treat the left wrist as yes and the right wrist as no, and now you can ask questions and receive a reply. We worked with outcome prediction, and this is a paper published in 2018. And what I'd like to highlight here is that you see on the leftmost side a list of patients, and the next two columns show the VT2 and VT3 accuracy. These were two vibrotactile paradigms. The VT2 paradigm is like I described. You had two vibrating tactors, one on the left and one on the right. The VT3 paradigm added an additional distractor paradigm. Now, as I've said many times, I feel that the VT3 paradigm reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of the P300. You could see, for example, Gonzalez and Polic, 2002, my paper with John Polic in 2008. My hypothesis is that you could take the distractor and remove it or place it between two pillows or something, and you get the same results. But I'll move on for now. What you'll see in the next two columns is the outcome after 6 months in terms of the clinical outcome and where the patient was about 6 months later with the CRS-R score. Notice that the three patients who scored very well in terms of VT2 and VT3 accuracy all showed substantial improvement later on. So if you look at patient 1, all of these patients were in an unresponsive wakeful state. You see that patient 1 had excellent accuracy, and 6 months later, the clinical state had improved to minimally conscious with a fairly high CRS-R score, which is a standardized test of function. The next such patient who scored above our threshold in both tasks, which is 50% at or above our threshold, is UWS7. And you see that after 6 months, this patient had also improved to a minimally conscious state with a pretty good CRS-R score. And then patient 9, 6 months later, was awake, which is even better than minimally conscious state, of course. This person had emerged into consciousness with a CRS-R score of 23. By contrast, the remaining unresponsive wakeful state patients, all of whom scored below the 50% threshold, did not have such promising clinical outcomes 6 months later. And so this indicates that a patient's performance with the vibrotactile brain-computer interface task may be an effective predictor of where that patient will be 6 months later. And this can be very helpful for things like deciding whether the patient should undergo rehabilitation, providing correct information to the patient and family and friends, decisions about where the patient might want to live, and other such details. Now, we also did a study in which we explored the effects of recording ERPs over 10 different sessions. And the point of this slide and the next slide is that if you see the first run on the top and the best run on the bottom, you notice some noteworthy differences, both in terms of the ERPs shown here and then on the far right in terms of the system accuracy. So the point of this slide is that this patient, which was P14 in the study shown here, was able to potentially attain good accuracy with some robust differences, but this performance was inconsistent. And this is another example from the same paper. You can see that P9 had pretty good performance in his best run and terrible performance in the first run. So again, this is showing that if you record ERPs using the BCI task that we showed earlier, the vibrotactile task, and you do this over multiple runs, you get different results. And we believe one likely cause, as most clinicians have already determined, is that these people may be asleep or otherwise unaware at certain times. That is, it may not be that they choose not to perform the task, although that is a possibility. It may be that they simply are not able to. And so this is why I mentioned earlier that the fluctuations in and out of consciousness are very relevant. So this paper, along with prior work, helps to indicate that the results from a single recording session with ERPs, just like a single assessment session, may not be very informative. You need to record several times, at least 10 times in our case, to have a good idea of where that patient really is across different sessions. This is new work from a different group. I wasn't involved in this group, but it used visual displays, including from virtual reality, for EEG-based rehabilitation. And so again, I'd mentioned earlier that patients of this sort often do not have good visual function, but there are exceptions. And there was also very nice work recently involving physical therapy to reduce spasticity. So I've mentioned before that one way that you can perform rehabilitation is to help with pain or spasms or other issues that many of these patients experience. And so in the example here, the authors found that physical therapy can help reduce spasticity in these patients. And there's another nice paper from the same group showing the relationship between TDCS, or transcranial direct current stimulation, which may also be a promising approach toward rehabilitation. And so this slide has many such options. I won't go into them in detail just because of the length of this talk, but I have included many examples here. There's TMS, or transcranial magnetic stimulation. I just mentioned TDCS from different groups. Thalamic stimulation, pharmacological options, spinal cord stimulation, neurofeedback, decannulation, that's an interesting one, music, even hypnosis. And again, because rehabilitation is a broad approach, there are many different ways you can execute rehabilitation. It's unclear which directions will become most effective later, or which combinations of directions. And this is an important reason why we need to continue research in this field, including both laboratory-based research and development and clinical translation. Of course, this field raises many ethical issues, and these include, but are not limited to, replication and reliability. I mentioned that before, especially with this patient group. Privacy, identity, agency, false hope is a particular concern. Media misrepresentation is something that bothers me very greatly. Bi-fi is my term for BCI-based science fiction. And I'm also particularly concerned with certification and enforcement for systems, methods, and practitioners, not just with respect to persons with DOC, but a wide variety of BCI applications, including healthy users. And in many cases, the answers are not so unique for BCIs, but can be addressed through other ethical approaches, but not always. So there are some of these issues that are indeed unique and raise special challenges with BCIs. And this is also a slide that merits its own complete talk, and I have given much longer talks on ethics, and I'd recommend looking into this further. Also, it's not even clear that many of these issues are unique for patients. That is, while there are some that certainly are, many of these concerns may apply to healthy users as well. There are also theoretical issues to consider. So, like many people in BCI research, I've emphasized the need for interdisciplinary collaboration across different fields. This is also highlighted in the canonical paper of our field, Walpaugh et al. 2002, and many, many other talks, including one that John Walpaugh gave just a couple months ago in Samara. And like I said, this comes up all the time in talks about BCIs. We need more global BCI initiatives, and I have of course, an interest in funding sources. Like many people, you get what you pay for. I very much oppose bullshit BCIs, and that gets back to the misrepresentation and other issues. Oh, and I said that the pictures were collaborators, so no, this is an exception. I do not know of any publications by any bovine creatures. And since we're nearing the end of the talk, I wanted to address some emerging issues. And I'm getting, of course, away from disorders of consciousness, but BCIs in general. So first, classes and other ways to train people about BCIs are very important. Publicly available tools are growing online, and of course, COVID has forced many activities, including open access software and stuff, to remain online. And conferences in particular have generally been occurring online. So this year there have been some very nice online conferences and events. And I think this will continue after concerns with COVID and pandemics end or reduce. That is, even though I think we'll see a return to conferences and hackathons, which I'll get to shortly. There's hackathons at the bottom. Even though we'll have a return to such things, I think that overall we'll find that there will still be an ongoing increase in online activities to supplement these in-person activities. You should also check out the BCI Society webpage. And I'd like to conclude by thanking the different people who contributed to this talk. You can see my disclaimer there. This is just my opinion and so on. And you're welcome to email me with any questions. Thank you.